it would keep them warm. I'll smolder to my core more. May it down
With this segue story of 3.1, we get to focus quite a bit on the mysterious Doctor of Lahiroi, Luuk Herson. There have been many fascinating details into their past, and of course the Fraxidus with the new story, but one thing I've been thinking about even before the story released is the immense amount of symbolism and subtext that has gone into his character's design, which unfortunately didn't really make it into the story. So while we all know Luuk as a doctor with a mysterious past, if you're interested in also learning about the symbolic background and references that have inspired and influenced his design, we'll be exploring these things in this video. From the physician Luuk in the Bible, all the way to the blood of the Greek gods, and even the process of Hermetic alchemy with its steps of Nigredo, Albedo, and Rubedo. Although Luuk doesn't display many of his inspirations in the story, each of its different elements are really connected and frankly fascinating. If that's piqued your interest, I hope you'll enjoy the video. Just a fair warning though, that spoilers for the 3.1 segue story will be ahead.
I was good brave, the most beautiful. I feel like everything's golden. I was good face, myself with no cloak.
Luuk, which is German for Luke, in line with his brother's German name Rhein, seems to match up particularly with a doctor in the Bible, matching the whole biblical origin of the region of Lahiroi, of course. Luke, who wrote the book of Luke, which describes the life and death of Jesus, was also the companion of Paul the Apostle. Specifically, within Colossians 4:14, Luke is described as the beloved physician, effectively positing him as a great doctor, which is further evidenced by the medical knowledge that he shows within his own book, the Book of Luke. Just like his biblical inspiration, Luke's character revolves around medicine and his family tradition of doctors.
I was born into a family of doctors. My childhood toys were stethoscopes, and my bedtime stories were medical texts. Anyone would have said I was cut out for medicine.
In fact, within Luuk's Resonator trailer, one of the lines asks whether he wanted to become a great physician, just like his biblical counterpart. From his official diary entries and his work at Lahiroi, one can tell that medicine and being a doctor is the defining point of his character. His care and devotion for the people around him is parallel to the person who he was named after, a physician who took care of all around him, even at the lowest point in their lives. One of the most pivotal questions of Luuk's character, first introduced within his Resonator showcase, is the question of the scalpel or the scythe. As Luuk is proficient in Ichor-based combat alongside being a talented doctor, this is a metaphor for whether the scalpel or the knife is a tool of harm or healing. Luuk actually answers this question within the same trailer, coming to terms with himself and realizing that the scalpel is just a tool, whose purpose is dependent on the heart of the wielder. As we can see within Luuk's cinematics in combat, the scalpel and the scythe go hand in hand, being capable of both harm and healing. The reason I discuss this whole philosophy is of course because of a symbolic reference, specifically the Cadaceus, the symbol of two snakes winding around a staff that is on his shirt beneath its collar. Now, this is actually a very common medical symbol, being seen on many especially American hospitals and whatnot, but it's actually an incorrect evolution of the staff of Asclepius with only one snake. But that's not too important, because what we really need to focus on is snakes themselves. You may be wondering by now why it is that snakes are a medical symbol in the first place. After all, aren't snakes venomous and evil creatures? Well, that is true, but snakes are also symbolic of fertility, rebirth, and healing, because snakes were capable of shedding their skin. Additionally, though snake venom is dangerous, it is also an ingredient in medicine and antivenom, meaning that like Luke's scalpel, it can both heal and harm. Because of this symbolism, many instances of snakes in history have had a healing, medicinal kind of undertone. Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine, wielded a staff in which one snake was coiled. Later on, this was mistakenly replaced with Hermes' double snake staff, hence why medical fields tend to use both symbols, and why Luuk has the Cadaceus emblazoned on his shirt, as well as a single snake of Asclepius on his neck in some scenes. Later on in history, Moses' bronze serpent staff was able to cure the venom of the Israelites who had been poisoned, something that we actually talked about as being incorporated into Galbraith's design as well, furthering the idea of this dual symbolism of snakes, both a danger but also something that could heal. All in all, the takeaway here is that similar to the central question that defines Luuk's character, the symbolism of snakes in medicine are like the comparison of the scalpel and the scythe. They are both equally capable of harming and healing, a philosophy that is at the core of Luuk's character. As the root of Luuk's resonance and powers, it would be nearly impossible to not talk about the symbolic basis of the golden drug that fuels Luuk's combat, being Ichor. Ichor, coming from the ancient Greek word Ichor, was the golden blood that flowed through the Greek gods, which we know because there are many instances when the gods were wounded, such as when Ichor flows out of Aphrodite within Homer's Iliad. Wherefore they are bloodless and are called immortal. This blood, often described as gold or ethereal, was a metaphor for power and divinity itself, and as such the blood was terribly dangerous to normal mortals. When touched, it was said to be able to kill someone instantly, or to cause immense burning or turn them even mad. As you may recall, this is actually the exact effects of Ichor within Wuthering Waves. Amongst the many test subjects that took the Ichor drug of the Novial Corporation, only Luuk managed to truly control its godlike power. From diary entries, and especially Luuk's character story, we can see that not only was he the only real survivor, but he was the only one that did not go insane and get corrupted. Luuk's brother Rhine was one such case, who was burned by the Ichor and eventually went rabid. It was rejected by his body, and he wasted away until he was bedridden. Within his character story Storm, Luuk says that he was the only person truly healed by Ichor, while others had followed the grim trajectory of Rhine. Within his final character story, After the Fall, Rhine is even seen being entirely corrupted by Ichor, becoming violent and rabid, as Luuk literally has to bury him beneath the ice. As we can see, this basically exactly mirrors the real Greek Ichor. The liquid of the gods is something mortals were never meant to touch. As a final point to mention, I find it also interesting that we may have already seen Ichor within Wuthering Waves. In Augusta's Resonator trailer, she slices open the belly of Arsinosa, a classical-inspired, godlike figure within Septimot, and what exactly flows out? Golden blood, exactly like Ichor. Within Luuk's Resonator showcase and even his character stories is the idea of putrefaction and rot as something that must be carved out and excised, so much so that his trailer is metaphorically titled Putrid Truth. Piggybacking on the chapter on Ichor that we just discussed previously, I think it is beyond coincidence that the topic of Ichor links very heavily to Clement of Alexandria, a Christian theologian who composed a work called Exhortation to the Greeks. Within this work, he attempted to convince the Greeks to give up their pagan traditions and gods, instead turning to Jesus and Christianity. Importantly, within the work, he attempts to characterize the Greek gods as false, immoral, and empty, and one of the key ways he does this is by discussing the blood which runs through them, Ichor. As we discussed before, Ichor in Greek mythology was seen as a holy, godly liquid, symbolizing divinity and power. Clement of Alexandria, in his bid to discredit pagan gods, however, turned this on its head. He argued that since the Greek gods bled, then they must also be mortal. He directly characterized this blood as repulsive, as a putrefaction of blood, in order to point the gods themselves as false and disgusting. Now, this particular shift in Ichor is not only interesting but particularly relevant in Luuk's story. As we know, the Ichor drug in Wuthering Waves is capable of granting Luuk immense power and healing, but is also harmful and disgusting in a way, causing massive suffering to anyone else who takes it. As a sole product of the corrupt Novial Corporation, it makes sense why Luuk's showcase is titled Putrid Truth. The drug itself is disgusting, a harmful substance that only provided a false sense of godhood and divinity, just as Clement of Alexandria said. When we learn that the Thraxidus and the Grand Architect basically took over Novial and pushed the production of Ichor for their own ends, this makes even more sense. The Thraxidus are an organization that advocates for forced evolution and radical body modification, creating abominations of false divinity and gods, like Mia. Hence, while Ichor is a powerful godly substance, Luuk's constant reference to putrefaction and rot reveals the hidden cost of this. It is a false manufactured divinity, with immense side effects. As a final side note, do you recall perhaps the name of the Court of Savante astronaut that Luuk had to mercy kill at the end of the 3.1 story? His name was Uncle Clement. Even before Luuk released, one of my top theories for Luuk's symbolism was that it had to do with alchemy and the Magnum Opus, the Philosopher's Stone that could turn any metal into gold and provide eternal life. This surprisingly turned out to be much more correct than I anticipated. So let's first describe alchemy a little bit before we link this to Luuk. Hermetic and Alexandrian alchemy is a sort of pseudoscience that focuses on perfecting the body and soul of humans, sort of turning them essentially into gods on earth, in a similar nature to the Chinese Neidan and Weidan alchemy, which were extensively referenced within our video on Wuthering. Unlike its Chinese counterparts, the focus of Western alchemy was the Magnum Opus, or the Great Work, or the Philosopher's Stone. While many people would know this because of Harry Potter, the original Philosopher's Stone was a magical substance that could grant immortality, as well as turn any metal into gold, which in ancient times was seen as materials that could evolve and were alive in a sense. And what do you think is at the very center of Luuk's character and design? Gold. Both in regards to the Ichor we talked about, but also his character, which ties in themes of gold as false divinity and gold as the only color he can see, as Ichor has made him colorblind. However, there's even more to this, because Luuk's entire story and growth as a person is nearly wholly based on the 3 stages of alchemy, something that I think was very cleverly integrated into his design. Luuk's growth from an innocent child to a jaded spy and a talented doctor that controls and manipulates the gold is indicative of the processes and phases of alchemy. The alchemist thought that by diligent searching into the ways of nature, he might be able to imitate the natural process in his laboratories in order to realize the perfection of gold in his own lifetime, instead of waiting centuries for the same thing to happen more slowly. However, the process of alchemy has 3 major steps: Nigredo, Albedo, and Rubedo. And if you were wondering, yes, for you gooners, this is where the symbolism of some certain overlord characters come from. Anyhow, Nigredo, the first step, composes of putrefaction and decomposition, similar to how Luuk's life begins with chaos and anarchy. After his father's death, his life devolves into disaster as his brother Rhine grows increasingly sick, forcing him to have to find the putrid truth behind the name Novial, beginning his life as a spy. Albedo, the second step, composes of purification of the rot and putrefaction of Nigredo. It is often seen as a unity of opposites, as light and clarity is brought to someone's body and soul. This is seen after Luuk completes his foray in spying for the Fractsidus and finds the truth of Novial and his dead father, symbolically answered with the question that we already talked about, the scalpel or the scythe. As Luuk rationalizes that both these opposites, harming and healing, have their merits, he effectively completes the alchemical stage of Albedo. As a further note, in medieval study, Albedo was often symbolized with doves that represented the purity of the human spirit. And what is that we see in Luuk's banner illustration? Doves flying, which symbolizes his purification of the putrid truth and in turn, the phase of Albedo. The third and final step, Rubedo, is essentially the attainment of the Magnum Opus and the complete improvement of the self. As such, this stage is essentially Luuk's final growth as a character. As he settles into Lahairoi and gains composure over both his mental conflict and complete control over the gold powers of Ichor, he has achieved completeness. This, in medieval study, was often symbolized as the figure of a crowned king, which brings us back to the banner illustration, which I really think is an excellent representation of this three-step process. Nigredo, when he was young and excising the putrid truth. Albedo, represented by flying doves and the unification of the scalpel and the scythe. And finally, Rubedo, represented by the achievement of the Magnum Opus, with Luuk in the center sitting and manipulating gold like a king. It's a fascinating way to depict someone's life, for sure. If that wasn't enough, this alchemical process was also something that heavily inspired Carl Jung, whose process of individuation, which we've referenced already quite extensively within both the Cadaceus and Shorekeeper videos, is effectively a psychological model that is built on the backbone of the alchemical prototype of bettering one's soul, as Luuk, similar to Cadaceus and Shorekeeper, resolves the conflicting darkness and opposites of his character to become the person he is in the present. If you've been watching my previous videos, it would be completely unsurprising that Luuk, alongside other Lahairoi characters, takes inspiration from the Norse mythology that permeates the entire region. While I don't have full confidence in this theory, so of course take it with a grain of salt, Luuk's convenient animation character trailer, which has him break away from chains, seems very emblematic of Loki's punishment after killing Balder within the Voluspa. Now, Balder and Loki have already been referenced within Lahairoi, being the Exostrider and the Frenodian Aleph-1, respectively, so I'm not exactly sure why Luuk is being portrayed almost like Loki in a way, something which seems to be corroborated with the case of Luuk's brother, Rhine. Within his fifth character story, though vague, it seems that Luuk pushes his brother after he was corrupted by Ichor under the ice, burying him. Though we don't get a lot of details, the cutscene at the end of the 3.1 Segway story seems to corroborate this, with Rover telling Luuk that his brother was at least alive, as they stared at a frozen landscape, presumably where they buried him and made a promise to see each other next winter. While I often introduce the book or text that defines a character much earlier in the video, for Luuk I decided to put at the very end, because it unites so many elements of what we've covered already, such as his German origins, as well as Norse mythology and even medieval alchemy. Thus Rheingold, the first of 4 musical epics of Richard Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen, draws heavily from Norse mythology within the Poetic Edda and the Volsunga saga, as well as Wagner's own view of medieval alchemy, both of which we've already covered in this video. The story focuses on the Rheingold, a magical gold that can be crafted into a ring that grants its wielder ultimate power, a parallel to the golden Magnum Opus within alchemy that must be crafted from the primal materia, or raw material. As a ring is stolen and passed around different characters in the story that are all inspired by Norse mythology, by the way, such as for example Loki being Loki. The original owner, the dwarf Alberich, is furious at the gods of Valhalla for stealing his ring, putting a curse on it that dooms whoever wears it with misfortune before the musical ends. Wagner within Das Rheingold takes a bit of a satirical approach to alchemy in the Magnum Opus, portraying it not just as a tool for mortal perfection, but a mirror to expose greed and hypocrisy. Throughout the story, the Norse gods constantly yearn for the ring's power, showing that they are not immortal, but vulnerable like mortals if they venerate its power so much. Similar to what Clement of Alexandria said earlier about Ichor, they are false divinities. As Luuk says, they are but a gilded name. Only their surface is coated in gold, while everything underneath is empty and false. Further, the curse Alberich places on the golden ring has been associated with alchemical putrefaction and moral decay, further symbolizing that gold, as we've said before, can be equally dangerous as it is precious. Like Ichor within Wuthering Waves, the Rheingold within Wagner's musical is extremely powerful, but it is also tainted and cursed. Is it really a coincidence that Luuk and his brother, named Rhine, show both sides of the power and dangers of Ichor that mirrors the Rheingold within Wagner's musical? The ring, made of the Rheingold that has been molten down into a ring capable of immense power and suffering, even seems to match the phrase that Kuro used to introduce Luuk to us for the first time. Should that molten gold drip? It all seems a bit too much of a coincidence for me. As always, I hope you enjoyed this video. Though a lot of Luuk's symbolism I felt wasn't really shown within the story, with a lot of details like the exact conditions or whereabouts of his brother Rhine still unknown, I felt that the thoughts that actually went into his design and drip marketing in particular were very sound. If you enjoy my work, please consider subscribing, donating through the comments, or even becoming a channel member. Your support, of course, helps immensely. As always, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.